Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The lock engaged with a sound like a gunshot, sealing the steel door and trapping Julian inside the beast's lair. The air in the penthouse wasn't just stale, it was heavy, saturated with a pheromone density so thick it tasted like copper and burnt sugar on the back of his tongue. Julian Vane adjusted the collar of his sterile white coat, his fingers trembling imperceptibly. He wasn't a stranger to volatile alphas. He was the city's most expensive pheromone neutralizer, a specialist called in when suppressants failed and restraints shattered, but this was different. The darkened hallway stretched out like the throat of a monster. Somewhere in the shadows of the expansive living room, a creature was pacing. A creature that possessed enough wealth to buy nations and enough raw biological power to crush Julian's windpipe with a single hand. Mr. Vane, a digitized voice came from his earpiece. It was the head of security, safe behind 3 inches of bulletproof glass in the lobby. Vitals are spiking. Heart rate at 180. He has broken the furniture. Proceed with extreme caution. You have 10 minutes to stabilize him before we have to gas the room. Understood, Julian whispered, tapping the comms off. He didn't need a distraction. He walked forward, his footsteps silent on the marble floor. The scent grew stronger, cedarwood, ozone, and something darker, like a storm about to break. It was the scent of an alpha prime in a paradoxical cycle, a rut induced not by desire, but by rage. A low growl vibrated through the floorboards. Get out. The voice was a jagged tear in the silence. Julian stopped. 10 feet away, in the shadow cast by a broken floor-to-ceiling window, sat a silhouette. Eyes that glowed with a predatory, bioluminescent gold pierced the gloom. I can't do that, Mr. Blackwood, Julian said, his voice practiced, calm, an anchor in the chaotic sea of the alpha's hormones. You requested my services. I am here to ground you. I hired a beta. The silhouette snarled, shifting. The movement was a blur of violence. Suddenly, Julian was pinned against a marble pillar, a massive hand clamped around his throat, not squeezing, but holding him there, trapped. Dorian Blackwood towered over him. His shirt was torn open, revealing a chest heaving with exertion and sweat that glistened like oil. His face was a masterpiece of masculine ruin, sharp jawline clenched tight, lips pulled back in a grimace of pain. You, Dorian breathed, leaning in until his nose brushed Julian's pulse point. He inhaled deeply, a shudder racking his massive frame. You don't smell like a beta. You smell like rain, like silence. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. He had spent a fortune on illicit blockers to mask his status as a recessive omega. If Dorian broke through that chemical veil, this job would turn from a medical procedure into a massacre. I am what you need me to be, Julian managed to say, forcing his own pheromones to remain locked down, projecting a calm, sterile neutrality. He raised his hands slowly, palms open. Let me help you. The heat is burning your neural pathways. If you don't calm down, you will suffer a stroke. Dorian stared at him, the golden haze in his eyes flickering. The alpha was fighting a war within himself. The biological imperative to destroy or claim was warring with the shred of humanity left in the CEO's brilliant mind. Then do it, Dorian rasped, dropping his hand and stumbling back. Calm the beast. But if you try to sedate me, I will break you. The first session was a dance on the edge of a knife. Julian didn't use needles. He didn't use gas. His method was controversial, rare, and dangerous. He used biofeedback manipulation, using his own controlled breathing and touch to regulate the alpha's nervous system. It required physical contact. Dorian sat on the edge of the ruined velvet sofa, his head in his hands. Julian stood behind him, his slender fingers working into the tension knots at the base of the alpha's neck. Breathe with me, Julian instructed softly. In for 4. Hold for 4. Dorian let out a ragged breath. The oppressive weight of the cedarwood scent began to recede, just a fraction. Why do you do this? Dorian asked, his voice hoarse. Walking into cages with rabid animals. Someone has to hold the key, Julian replied, pressing his thumbs into the pressure points behind Dorian's ears. The truth was far less poetic. Julian did it for the money. The medical debt from his sister's experimental treatments was a noose around his neck, tightening every month. The Vipers, a loan shark syndicate running the city's underground, didn't care about ethics. They wanted their credits. A contract with Dorian Blackwood, the recluse billionaire of Blackwood Tech, was enough to clear the debt entirely. All Julian had to do was survive 6 weeks of therapy during Dorian's volatile pre-rut cycle. "You have good hands," Dorian murmured, his head tilting back, resting against Julian's stomach. It was an intimate gesture, one that breached the professional boundary Julian tried so hard to maintain. Through the thin fabric of his shirt, he could feel the heat radiating from Dorian's skull. It was intoxicating. Julian stiffened. Don't react. "You are a beta. You are stone. Thank you, sir. We are almost done for the night." Dorian's hand shot up, grabbing Julian's wrist. His grip was iron, but his thumb brushed over the delicate skin of Julian's inner wrist with surprising tenderness. "Don't call me sir," Dorian whispered, his eyes closed. "Not when you're the one holding the leash." For the next 3 weeks, the dynamic shifted. The sessions became less about crisis management and more about maintenance. The violence in the penthouse subsided, replaced by a tense, electric quiet. The furniture was repaired. The lights were turned on. But the danger didn't vanish, it mutated. Dorian Blackwood was an apex alpha, a genetic rarity. He was possessive by nature, territorial by design. And he had decided that Julian was part of his territory. It started with small things. Julian would arrive to find a dinner spread waiting, far too elaborate for a business meeting. Then, the gifts. A platinum watch left on the side table. A new coat to replace the one damp from the ring. "It is unprofessional to accept gifts from clients," Julian said one evening, pushing the velvet box back across the coffee table. Dorian was pouring 2 glasses of amber whiskey. He looked different now, civilized. He wore a charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his dark hair slicked back. But the predator was still there, lurking in the lazy grace of his movements. "It's not a gift," Dorian said, handing Julian a glass. "It's an investment. I can't have my therapist looking like a pauper. It reflects poorly on me. I am an independent contractor. How I look reflects on me." Dorian chuckled, a low rumble that made the liquid in the glass tremble. He stepped closer, invading Julian's personal space. He didn't stop until he was looming over him, boxing Julian in against the high-rise window that overlooked the sprawling, neon-lit city. "You are stubborn," Dorian observed. "I like that. Most people fold the moment I look at them. I'm paid to be stubborn. Is that all you are?" "Paid." Dorian leaned down, his nose brushing against Julian's neck. Julian stopped breathing. His suppressors were strong, top of the line, but they weren't magic. If Dorian got too close, if he tasted the skin. "You smell different today," Dorian murmured, inhaling deeply. "Sweeter. Underneath the antiseptic and the rain. There is something like honey." Julian shoved him back. It was a reflexive action, born of pure panic. To his surprise, Dorian stumbled. Not because Julian was strong, but because Dorian allowed it. The alpha looked at him, eyes wide, pupils blown black. "I should go," Julian said, his voice trembling. "Session over." "Julian," Dorian said, his voice dropping an octave. A command. Julian froze at the door. "Tomorrow," Dorian said. "Pack a bag. We are going to the gala at the Spire. My public appearances have been lacking. I need my anchor. That is not in my contract." "Read the fine print," Dorian replied, picking up his drink. Clause 4, Section B. "The contractor must be available for social integration exercises." "I own your time for the next month, Julian. Don't make me enforce the penalty clauses." Julian grit his teeth. The penalty clauses would bankrupt him. "Fine," Julian spat. "But if you lose control in public, I am not dragging you out." Dorian smiled, and it was the sharpest, most dangerous thing Julian had ever seen. "If I lose control, Julian, you are the only one who can bring me back." The Spire was the pinnacle of high society, a glass needle piercing the clouds. The gala was a masquerade of wealth and hypocrisy. Alphas preened in tuxedos, omegas were draped in silk and jewels like prized ornaments, and betas served the drinks, invisible. Julian stood by the bar, nursing a sparkling water. He felt exposed in the tuxedo Dorian had provided, midnight blue velvet that hugged his frame a little too tightly. Dorian was currently in the center of the room, surrounded by a pack of board members and rival CEOs. He looked regal, untouchable. But Julian's eyes were trained on the tension in Dorian's shoulders. The alpha was agitated. The sensory overload of the party, the clashing perfumes, the noise, the pheromones, was chipping away at his control. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Julian turned to see a man sliding up to the bar. He was slim, with snake-like eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Silas Vane, Julian's cousin, and a mid-level enforcer for the Vipers. Silas, Julian said, his blood turning to ice. I told you. I have the money. I just need 2 more weeks. The boss is getting impatient, Jules, Silas whispered, leaning in. He smelled of cheap cologne and malice. He knows you're working for Blackwood. That's a big fish. He thinks maybe you could help us fillet him. No, Julian hissed. I'm a therapist. I don't do corporate espionage. You'll do what you're told, Silas said, his hand gripping Julian's arm tightly. Or maybe we pay a visit to your sister. I hear the hospital security is lax on the night shift. Rage, hot and white, flared in Julian's chest. He jerked his arm away, but Silas was faster, twisting Julian's wrist until the bone creaked. Let go of him. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise of the party like a guillotine blade. The music seemed to stop. The chatter died. Dorian Blackwood stood 10 feet away. He wasn't looking at Silas. He was looking at where Silas's hand touched Julian. The air pressure in the room dropped. The scent of ozone and burning cedar exploded outward, a physical wave of dominance that made the weaker alphas in the room drop to their knees. Mr. Blackwood, Silas stammered, releasing Julian instantly. We're family. I was just saying hello. You were hurting him, Dorian said. He took a step forward. You touched what is mine. The room gasped. Mine. In the language of the elite, that wasn't a casual possessive. That was a claiming declaration. Julian's eyes widened. Dorian, stop. It's fine. It is not fine, Dorian growled. His eyes were fully gold now. The rut he had been suppressing was surging forward, triggered by the threat to his chosen mate. Because that's what this was. Julian realized it with a jolt of terror. Dorian hadn't just hired him. His biology had recognized Julian from the moment they met in the dark. The calming effect wasn't therapy, it was compatibility. Dorian, listen to me. Julian stepped between Dorian and a terrified Silas. Look at me. Breathe. In for 4. He threatened you. Dorian snarled, his gaze locking onto Julian. I can smell his fear. I can smell your fear. Dorian reached out, cupping Julian's face. The touch was burning hot. Why do you smell like distress? Tell me. It's nothing, Julian pleaded, aware of the hundreds of eyes watching them. Please, let's go. But Silas, foolish and greedy, saw an opening. He owes us money, Blackwood. He's just a broke little Omega pretending to be a doctor to pay off his debts. The silence that followed was absolute. Dorian froze. His thumb brushed over Julian's cheekbone. He looked deep into Julian's eyes, searching. Is that true? Dorian whispered. You're an Omega? Julian felt the tears prick his eyes. The game was up. The deception was over. He nodded, a microscopic movement. He expected anger. He expected to be thrown out. Instead, a low, rumbling growl erupted from Dorian's chest. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated possessiveness. He pulled Julian flush against his body, wrapping one massive arm around his waist, shielding him from the room. Dorian turned his gaze back to Silas. He owes you nothing. His debts are mine. And if you ever speak his name again, I will burn your entire organization to the ground. Get out. Silas didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled away. But the damage was done. Dorian's control was shattered. The rut was here. We leave. Dorian ground out, his jaw tight. Now. The ride back to the penthouse was a blur of speed and silence. The driver had the privacy partition up, but the tension in the back seat was thick enough to choke on. Dorian sat on the far side of the limousine, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. He was shaking. You lied to me, he said finally, his voice ragged. I had to, Julian replied, hugging himself. Recessive Omegas in my field. We aren't taken seriously. We're seen as liabilities. Or prey. Did you think I would hurt you? Dorian looked at him, pain warring with the lust in his eyes. I didn't know you. And now? Julian looked at the man who had just stared down a syndicate enforcer for him. Now? I don't know. The car stopped. They didn't wait for the driver. Dorian practically dragged Julian into the elevator. When the doors opened to the penthouse, the facade crumbled. Dorian pinned Julian against the wall the moment the doors closed. He buried his face in Julian's neck, inhaling deeply, no longer holding back. God, Dorian groaned. You smell perfect. Why did you hide this? Dorian, you're rut, Julian gasped, his hands gripping Dorian's shoulders. The contact sent electric shocks through his system. His own body, reacting to the sheer potency of the alpha's pheromones, was beginning to heat up. The suppressors were failing completely now. You need your medication. I don't need pills, Dorian growled, biting lightly at the junction of Julian's shoulder and neck. I need you. This is the hormones talking, Julian argued weakly, though his head was tilting back, baring his throat. You hired me to calm you. I hired you because I couldn't look away, Dorian confessed, lifting his head. His eyes were burning gold, swirling with raw need. From the moment I saw your file, I knew. My wolf knew. But you were a ghost. A scentless ghost. He pressed his hips against Julian. There was no mistaking the hardness there. But now I can smell you, Julian. You smell like home. Julian's resolve shattered. He had spent his whole life running, hiding, pretending to be something he wasn't to survive in a world dominated by alphas. But here, trapped against the wall by the most dangerous of them all, he didn't feel afraid. He felt seen. If we do this, Julian whispered, there is no going back to the contract. No going back to professional distance. Burn the contract, Dorian murmured, his lips hovering inches from Julian's. I don't want an employee. I want a partner. I want you by my side, not in the shadows. I want to ruin you for anyone else. You're arrogant, Julian breathed. I am an alpha, Dorian corrected. And you are my omega. Deny it. Tell me to stop, and I will walk away right now. I will lock myself in the panic room and suffer through this alone. Tell me to stop. It was the ultimate test. Even in the throes of a biological imperative that drove most men to madness, Dorian was giving him a choice. He was handing Julian the weapon. Julian looked at the man, the monster, the savior, the billionaire. He saw the loneliness behind the gold. He felt the trembling of Dorian's hands, restraining his own strength to keep from bruising Julian's skin. Julian reached up, tangling his fingers in Dorian's dark hair. He pulled the alpha down. Don't you dare stop, Julian whispered. Dorian didn't. He kissed Julian with the force of a starving man. It was messy, desperate, and overwhelmingly hot. They stumbled backward, knocking over a vase, not caring as it shattered. Dorian lifted Julian effortlessly, wrapping Julian's legs around his waist, carrying him toward the master bedroom like a prize he had won from the gods. The night was a blur of skin and teeth and sweat. It wasn't gentle, it couldn't be. The years of repressed instinct from both of them poured out in a frenzy of passion. Julian found himself meeting Dorian's intensity, clawing at his back, demanding more. When the fever finally broke, hours later, the city lights were fading into the gray of dawn. They lay tangled in the sheets, limbs heavy and intertwined. The air in the room was different now. The chaotic, aggressive scent of the alpha had mellowed, blended perfectly with the sweet, honeyed rain of the omega. It was a new scent. A bonded scent. Dorian was awake, tracing the line of Julian's spine with a lazy finger. The vipers, Dorian said quietly, his voice a deep rumble against Julian's ear. I meant what I said. They are finished. By noon today, their accounts will be frozen and their leaders in custody. Julian rested his head on Dorian's chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. You can't just destroy a syndicate because they annoyed you. I can do anything, Dorian said simply. He kissed the top of Julian's head. Especially for my mate. Julian smiled, closing his eyes. He should be terrified. He was in the bed of a man who could reshape the city's skyline on a whim. But for the first time in his life, the future didn't look like a dark alley. It looked like the sunrise filtering through the glass walls of the penthouse. I still expect to be paid for the session, Julian mumbled, sleep dragging him down. Dorian laughed, a bright, genuine sound that chased away the last of the shadows. I think, Dorian whispered, pulling the duvet over them both. We can negotiate a raise. And that is how the recessive Omega didn't just tame the beast. He made the beast build him a throne. If you enjoyed seeing Julian bring the mighty CEO to his knees, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you trust a lover whose instincts are hardwired to possess you? Or is that a red flag you'd run from? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,